Okay, so I get it. You're out there working hard on your English.
Mm.
But then you start to think, is my accent holding me back?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are people even taking me seriously when I speak?
Yeah.
Well, Dubai, we're going to deep dive into this whole accent thing
Okay.
and find out why pronunciation is actually the real key to confident communication.
You know, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
There was this study from the University of Chicago that found people with accents are often perceived as less credible,
Really?
even if what they're saying is perfectly logical. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't the accent itself that was the problem. It was unclear pronunciation.
So you're saying it's not about, like, losing my accent entirely.
Right.
It's about making sure I'm pronouncing words clearly.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Pronunciation is like the building blocks of language.
Okay.
It's about forming those individual sounds correctly so that, like, ship doesn't end up sounding like sheep.
Right.
Accent, on the other hand, is more like the music of your language.
Mhm.
It's the rhythm, the intonation.
Oh, okay.
It's a unique flavor that you bring to those sounds.
So it's like I can still have my own unique rhythm,
Yes,
but I need to make sure those individual notes are clear.
exactly.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the light here.
Good. And you know, this whole accent thing is even more interesting.
Yeah.
When you consider how the brain processes language,
Oh, really?
we tend to focus more on the content of what someone is saying
Uh-huh.
when they have a familiar accent.
Okay.
But when the accent is unfamiliar, our brains have to work harder to decode the sounds,
Oh,
which can actually distract from the message itself.
that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's like when I first started listening to podcasts with British accents, I
Hmm.
was so focused on the accent that I totally missed like half of what they were saying.
Exactly. And that's why clear pronunciation is so crucial.
Okay.
It reduces that cognitive load for the listener and allows them to actually tune into your message.
Gotcha. So we've established that pronunciation matters.
Yes.
But let's be honest, some sounds in English.
Can be downright treacherous,
Oh, absolutely.
especially if those sounds don't even exist in your native language.
For sure, like the th sound, for example.
Oh, the fish.
It's a notorious troublemaker.
I remember trying to teach my Italian cousin how to say that.
Yeah.
His tongue just wouldn't cooperate.
It requires very specific placement, like lightly between your teeth
Okay.
with a gentle flow of air.
Wow.
It's not something you find in many languages.
So it's like learning a whole new way to use your mouth.
Yeah, you could say that. And then there's the whole issue of word stress and rhythm.
Right.
English is what we call a stress-timed language.
Stress time.
It means that we emphasize certain syllables within a word or a sentence.
Uh-huh.
And those stressed syllables can completely change the meaning.
Oh, wow.
Think about the word present.
Okay.
If you stress the first syllable,
Yeah.
it's a noun, a gift.
Right.
But if you stress the second syllable,
Yeah.
it becomes a verb to give something.
Whoa, that's wild. I never really thought about it that way before.
It's subtle, but it's important.
So how do we know which syllable to stress?
That's where listening to native speakers comes in.
Okay.
Pay attention to the rhythm of their speech, the way they rise and fall on certain words.
Gotcha.
It's all about picking up on those cues.
So it's like learning a secret code,
Mhm.
cracking the rhythm of the language.
Precisely. And the more you listen, the more you'll start to internalize those patterns.
Yeah.
And naturally incorporate them into your own speech.
Okay, so we've got these pronunciation hurdles.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily for us, our sources also offer some really practical solutions.
Oh, good.
They suggest 3 main techniques:
Okay.
shadowing, recording yourself, and using pronunciation apps.
Right.
Let's start with shadowing.
Okay.
What exactly does that involve?
Shadowing is basically mimicking a native speaker as closely as possible.
Got it.
You find audio or video clips in English and try to match their pronunciation, their rhythm, and their intonation.
So it's like having a virtual pronunciation coach.
Exactly. You're training your mouth and your ears to work together
Cool.
to replicate the sounds you're hearing.
And what kind of sources work best for shadowing?
Oh, there are tons of options. You could
Okay.
use TED Talks,
Yeah.
podcasts like this one, even movies. Find a speaker whose style you admire and try to emulate them.
Oh, cool.
I've even heard of people shadowing stand-up comedians to work on their comedic timing.
Wow. Now that's dedication.
Right.
Okay, on to recording yourself.
All right.
This one feels a little intimidating to me,
Uh-huh.
but I can see how it would be helpful.
It can be a little awkward at first, I'll admit.
Yeah.
But it's one of the best ways to identify those subtle pronunciation errors you
Wow.
might not even realize you're making.
So it's like having a personal pronunciation coach in your pocket.
Exactly. You can listen back to your recordings, pinpoint areas that need improvement,
Okay.
and track your progress over time.
You know, it's funny. A friend of mine was preparing for this big presentation, and she was super nervous about her pronunciation.
Mm.
She started recording herself reading the same short paragraph every day.
Oh, wow.
And after just a few weeks, she was amazed at the difference.
Really?
She said it felt like someone had flipped a switch and her pronunciation just clicked.
That's fantastic. It just goes to show that consistent practice really does pay off.
That's great.
And speaking of practice, we can't forget about the amazing world of technology.
Right.
There are so many pronunciation apps out there these days that can provide personalized feedback and targeted exercises.
We're talking about apps like Elsa Speak and SpeechLink, right?
Those are great examples.
Yeah.
These apps use speech recognition technology to analyze your pronunciation and pinpoint areas where you might be struggling.
Huh. Interesting.
They'll even give you specific exercises to work on those tricky sounds.
It's like having a pronunciation coach available 24/7 right in your pocket.
Exactly. And they're incredibly convenient. You can practice anytime, anywhere, whether you're commuting, waiting in line, or just relaxing at home.
So we've got shadowing, recording ourselves, and pronunciation apps.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot to take in.
It is.
Which of these techniques would you recommend listeners prioritize?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's about choosing one over the other.
Okay.
It's more about finding what works best for you and
Right.
fits into your lifestyle.
Makes sense.
You could start with shadowing for 15 minutes a day,
Okay.
and then maybe once a week, record yourself reading a short passage to track your progress.
So it's not about trying to do everything at once.
Right.
It's about finding a rhythm that works for you and being consistent.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes the most effective approach is the simplest one.
What do we mean?
Well, one of the sources we have for this deep dive is an interview with a renowned linguist
Okay.
who advocates for something called active listening.
Active listening. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Isn't that about like being fully present in a conversation
Uh-huh.
and really paying attention to what the other person is saying?
That's part of it, but this linguist is talking about active listening specifically for pronunciation.
Oh, okay.
It's about consciously paying attention to the sounds of English,
Right.
the way native speakers form those sounds, the rhythm and intonation they use.
Gotcha.
She suggests spending a few minutes each day simply listening to English audio,
Okay.
whether it's a podcast, a song, or even a conversation on the street.
Mm.
The key is to really tune in to the sounds, to almost dissect them in your mind.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like training your ears to hear the nuances of the language.
Precisely. And the more you listen, the more those sounds will become ingrained in your mind.
Yeah.
And the easier it will be to replicate them in your own speech.
It's like immersing yourself in the soundscape of the language.
Exactly. And, you know, it's funny because often the most effective solutions are the simplest ones.
Really?
We tend to overcomplicate things, but sometimes the best approach is just to listen, to absorb, to allow those sounds to wash over you.
So it's about finding a balance between active practice
Mm-hmm.
and passive immersion.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There will be ups and downs, moments of frustration, and moments of triumph.
Yeah, I can see that.
But the key is to keep practicing, keep listening, and keep believing in yourself.
Well said. And speaking of believing in ourselves, I think it's time we tackle that big elephant in the room.
Oh, yeah.
That persistent myth that we need a perfect accent to be taken seriously.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, the myth of the
Yeah.
perfect accent. It's this idea that you need to, like, erase your unique voice
Right.
and sound just like a native speaker to be credible.
Which is totally bogus, right?
Exactly. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
English is a global language spoken by billions of people
Right.
with diverse accents.
Right.
What truly matters is being understood,
Okay.
clearly and confidently conveying your message.
And there's something to be said for authenticity,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, haven't you found that speakers who embrace their accents
Yeah,
can be, like, incredibly engaging?
absolutely. There's actually a study that found listeners rated speakers with mild accents as more trustworthy and likable
Wow.
than those with standard accents.
Oh.
It's like the accent adds a layer of personality, a certain je ne sais quoi.
I love that. So instead of viewing our accents as something we need to, like, hide or erase, we should see them as assets.
Yes,
That's part of what makes us unique and interesting.
exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
where your unique voice shines through,
Right.
where your words are clear and your message resonates,
Okay.
regardless of where your accent might place you on the map of global English speakers.
I like that.
Yeah.
You know, this whole conversation reminds me of something I read about the evolution of language.
Oh, yeah.
It's constantly changing, adapting, incorporating new influences. And accents are a beautiful reflection of that evolution.
That's a great point. Language is a living, breathing thing.
Yeah.
And accents are part of what keeps it vibrant and diverse.
Totally.
Imagine a world where everyone spoke with the exact same accent.
Oh my gosh.
It would be pretty boring, wouldn't it?
It would be so boring.
Yeah.
So let's ditch that pressure to sound like someone else.
Yes.
And celebrate the tapestry of accents that make up the global English-speaking community.
Absolutely. Embrace your unique voice and focus on clarity.
Okay.
That's the real key to unlocking your communication potential.
Well said.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that different situations might call for different levels of formality in pronunciation. Can you elaborate on that?
Of course.
Yeah.
You see the level of formality, the audience you're addressing, even the medium of communication.
Right.
All these factors can influence how much emphasis is placed on pronunciation.
So in a casual conversation with friends, maybe a slight slip up here or there isn't a big deal.
Exactly. The focus is on connection, shared understanding.
Okay.
Those little imperfections might even add to the charm of the interaction.
But if you're giving a presentation to a large audience, or maybe even recording a podcast like this one, pronunciation takes on a greater significance.
Absolutely. In those settings, clarity becomes paramount.
Right.
You want to ensure that your message is easily understood by everyone, regardless of their own language background.
It's about respecting your audience's time and attention, making sure they can effortlessly follow your train of thought.
Precisely. And it's not just about avoiding misunderstandings. It's also about conveying professionalism and credibility.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If someone is like mumbling or mispronouncing key terms, it can undermine their message.
Yeah.
Even if the content itself is brilliant.
Unfortunately, yes. And this is especially relevant in professional settings. Like job interviews or business negotiations.
So we've got the casual end of the spectrum where connection is key. And the more formal settings where clarity and credibility take center stage.
Exactly.
But what about something like, say, creative writing or poetry? Does pronunciation play a role there?
It certainly can. Think about the power of spoken word poetry. Where the rhythm, the intonation, the way words are delivered, it all contributes to the overall impact of the piece.
It's like the words come alive when they're spoken with intention and clarity.
Exactly. And even in written poetry, where the words are meant to be read silently, the poet often crafts the language with a specific rhythm or cadence in mind, relying on the reader's inherent understanding of pronunciation to create that intended effect.
It's like the poet is leaving subtle clues for the reader, guiding them on how to hear the poem in their mind's ear.
A beautiful analogy. So yes, even in the realm of creative writing, pronunciation, or at least an awareness of it, can play a significant role.
That's fascinating. It's like pronunciation is this hidden layer, this underlying current that flows through all forms of communication, whether we're consciously aware of it or not.
And I think that's a key insight for our listeners to grasp. Pronunciation is not just a technical skill to be mastered. It's an integral part of how we connect with others, how we express ourselves, and how we make our voices heard in the world.
You know what strikes me about this whole discussion?
What's that?
It's really shifted my perspective on what it means to be a good speaker.
Oh, really?
It's not about sounding like someone else. It's about being authentically yourself while also being mindful of how your pronunciation affects the listener.
I couldn't agree more. It's about finding that balance between individuality and clarity. Between expressing your unique voice and ensuring that your message is understood.
And that's a journey we're all on.
Absolutely. We're all constantly learning, evolving, refining our communication skills.
And the beauty of it is that there's no finish line.
Yeah.
There's always room for growth, for experimentation.
For sure.
For discovering new ways to make our voices heard.
Exactly.
Speaking of making our voices heard,
we've
talked a lot about the importance of pronunciation. But we haven't really delved into the practical side of things. What are some specific tips or techniques that listeners can use to improve their pronunciation?
Well, we've already touched on a few great techniques like shadowing and recording yourself. But there's so much more you can do.
Like what? Give us the goods.
One technique that I find particularly helpful is to break down words into their individual sounds. It's like becoming a phonetic detective.
Phonetic detective. I like the sound of that.
It's all about understanding how sounds are formed in the mouth, where your tongue goes, how your lips move, whether air is coming out of your nose.
Wow.
Once you understand the mechanics of it,
right,
it becomes much easier to replicate those sounds accurately.
So it's like learning the building blocks of pronunciation.
Exactly. And there are tons of resources out there
Oh, cool.
that can help you with this.
Like what?
You can find phonetic charts online,
Okay.
videos that demonstrate how to make different sounds, even interactive apps that provide visual feedback on your tongue placement.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're saying we don't have to just guess and hope for the best.
Right.
There's actually a science to it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And once you start to understand that science,
Okay.
it can really take the mystery out of pronunciation.
Okay, so we've got breaking down words into sounds. What else?
Another powerful technique is to focus on minimal pairs.
Minimal pairs? I'm not familiar with that term.
Minimal pairs are words that differ by just one sound,
Oh, okay.
like ship and sheep,
Right.
or leave and live. By practicing these pairs, you train your ear to distinguish between those subtle sound differences.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like isolating those tricky sounds.
Yeah.
And really zeroing in on them.
Exactly. And you can create your own minimal pair exercises.
Oh, wow.
Using online dictionaries or pronunciation apps. It's a really effective way to target specific areas where you might be struggling.
So it's all about breaking things down, getting granular with those sounds.
Right.
And I imagine this is especially helpful for sounds that don't exist in your native language.
Absolutely. Those sounds can feel completely alien at first.
Yeah.
But by breaking them down and practicing them in isolation, you can gradually train your mouth to produce them accurately.
You know, it's funny. We've been talking a lot about the technical aspects of pronunciation, but there's also a psychological component to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. A lot of times our fear of making mistakes or sounding funny can actually hold us back from improving our pronunciation.
It's like we get so caught up in our heads that we forget to just relax and have fun with it.
Exactly. It's important to remember that everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Even native speakers stumble over their words from time to time.
Right.
The key is to not let those mistakes paralyze you.
So how do we overcome that fear?
Yeah.
Any advice for our listeners out there who might be struggling with pronunciation anxiety?
Well, one thing that can help is to shift your focus from perfection to progress. Instead of aiming to sound exactly like a native speaker, focus on making small incremental improvements over time.
So it's about celebrating those little victories along the way.
Yes.
Like nailing a tricky sound or feeling more confident in a conversation.
Exactly. And remember, pronunciation is a skill that develops over time.
Okay.
It's not something that happens overnight.
It's like learning any new skill.
Right.
It takes practice, patience, and a willingness to embrace the journey.
Well said. And I think that's a great note to end on.
I agree.
Embrace the journey.
Yeah.
Celebrate your unique voice.
Love it.
And never stop exploring the fascinating world of pronunciation.
To our listeners out there, keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep sharing your voice with the world. Because the world needs to hear what you have to say.
Until next time, happy pronouncing.